right, I have to keep my voice down. I don't know why exactly, but this seems like the right thing to do because we're in the CBS network corridors, I guess. I kind of want to bust into the Drew Barrymore show set. That might be more exciting than watching the vice presidential debate, which might be down that way. I think that might be where the debate's happening. The spin room is in here, which we were just kind of walking around there doing some interviews. Help yourself to a beverage of your choice. And yeah, I mean, this studio, this whole building kind of reminds me of like a high school basement or something. I don't know. It's a little bit weird, but hey, we're making the most of it. Why are people gathered over there? It might be, yeah. I mean, let's go take a look. I think it might be people who are like photographers or stuff, or who are allowed to. Yeah, let's not even test our luck. I don't want to even get involved. I don't want to run afoul of any Secret Service. Yeah, that might be what is it, the spray? It's like the photographers who go in and take the photos. Okay, so there you go. Drew Barrymore show, CBS. Apparently this is like typically where the CBS sports, like NFL and stuff, is filmed. I don't know. I'm just going with the flow. All right, goodbye. Senator Brett, as you know, Iran launched a salvo of missiles today at Israel. Some of your colleagues, like Senator Graham, have called for the U.S. to support retaliatory action by Israel against Iran by perhaps bombing Iranian oil fields. What would be a retaliation strike by Israel, if any, that you would support, and how would you want or expect a Trump-Vance administration to differ with regard to Israel than the Biden administration?
This is actually easy. So if you look back to Trump and what would happen under Trump-Vance, I mean, you think about this. We got no new wars when Donald Trump was president. And that's because he actually understood what it meant to achieve peace through strength. If you look at the fact that Putin has invaded Ukraine twice, once under Obama, Biden, then under Biden, Harris, then you look at what happened in the Middle East. If you look at the Middle East under Donald Trump's presidency, we had the Abraham Accords. He had moved the embassy to Jerusalem. We were on the pathway to not only sustainable peace, but also to growing that peace to other nations, something that people thought couldn't be done. And now...
You want to incorporate Saudi Arabia into that framework?
I think Saudi Arabia is obviously a part of this conversation. And if you look at what happened on October 7th, there are many people that believe that they were close to actually, coming into the fold there, and that was one of the reasons that Hamas chose to strike. And so,
would you want the U.S. to offer security guarantees to Saudi Arabia?
1 second. So when you look back to your question, what they would do differently, obviously they would go back to a maximum pressure strategy that they had before. When we look at the sanctions underneath these two different administrations, so at the very end of Trump's administration versus where we are now under the Biden-Harris administration, I mean, the revenues are off the charts. I mean, we let them produce oil again. We have not been enforcing sanctions like we should. We allowed loopholes to continue under this administration. If you go back, even the New York Times reported in the last administration that both Hezbollah and Hamas were broke. And when you see that, that's what we have to do. Everything doesn't have to be military tools that you're using. I mean, we've got to use the non-military tools we have to actually dry Iran up financially.
So by imposing additional sanctions on Iran?
Well, you don't have to do additional ones. You just have to have the will to enforce the ones that are on the books. I have no idea why this administration chooses not to. They have chosen a strategy of appeasement, and look at where it's gotten us. And the more money that Iran has, we know what they do with it. They use it to fund nuclear proliferation. Then they use it to give Hamas, they fund terrorists in Gaza there in Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. And then look at what the Houthis are doing. They are literally using our ships as target practice. And guys, they have actually attacked us over 200 times. This administration, which let's remember that Joe Biden said Kamala Harris has been in lockstep with him in every single decision that he has made, has used this doctrine of don't. And every time they say don't, our adversaries do. And so I think that this goes back to weakness from the White House, and I think it's more of what we'll see if there were a Kamala Harris presidency. I think that's why it's so important to get Trump and Vance.
What about in terms of a tangible retaliatory strike against Iran or not?
J.D. Vance had a bit of a rocky start on the campaign trail.
Chairman Harris, so I recall you very staunchly defending Joe Biden remaining as nominee back when there was controversy over whether he should stay in that role. Do you regret so strongly standing?
Why would I regret supporting the guy who's probably the most accomplished legislative president that we've had in my lifetime?
Because a lot of the Democratic Party decided that he was not cognitively fit to remain as president for 4 years.
That's a bunch of BS.
Then why did they want to remove him?
In the end of the day, this is the situation. If you take a look at Joe Biden's legislative record, compare it to anybody else. Compare it to Donald Trump. Did Donald Trump do anything compared to Joe Biden in terms of legislative achievements, given what he got?
Then why did so many Democratic donors and people want to remove him?
Regardless of what donors wanted or whatever.
Well, they got their way, didn't they?
Joe Biden, in the end of the day, made a decision about what he wanted to do. And he believed, probably the most selfless act in American politics ever, to have the greatest gavel of power and to give that up to the next generation to move forward. Donald Trump, his vice president, who was trying to protect democracy, and he was willing to let his vice president risk his life in order to do that. Selfishness versus selflessness. I'm proud of Joe Biden each and every day and will always have his back.
So Biden had to... Okay.
Sorry, my bad. Sorry.
So obviously there's a major development in the Middle East today. Iran launched the missile salvo against Israel. There have been reports that Biden administration officials like Brett McGurk, Amos Hochstein, they were apparently privately encouraging or allowing or acquiescing to Israel to launch its offensive into Lebanon, whereas publicly, Biden administration officials, Anthony Blinken, Biden himself, were urging some form of ceasefire. Is there like an incongruity in the messaging around this?
Well, I didn't see that information, that you're sharing with me. I will say that Israel was attacked by Hezbollah on October 8th, and they have had to take nearly 100,000 people away from the border because of those attacks. They got to get their people back. They have a right to respond. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. The Iranians are the biggest funders of Hezbollah, and to support their proxy now is to attack Israel, and Israel needs to defend themselves, and we're an ally of Israel, and we're going to stand with them.
We've gone through almost a year now of these nominal ceasefire negotiations that have never amounted to anything. Meanwhile, the U.S. keeps supplying Israel with all the armaments that it requires, 2,000-pound bombs and so forth. So has the Biden administration just essentially provided a blank check to Israel? Would Kamala Harris continue that?
No, Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, is there repeatedly. And it's unfortunate we have not gotten to a deal that could release these hostages. But you got to remember, Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Israel not only has a right to defend themselves, they have an obligation to defend themselves.
But is that by virtue of the U.S. not using its leverage? I mean, it continues to supply the armaments for Israel to wage its military campaign. So what incentive does Israel have to comply with these ostensible ceasefire demands?
Well, I don't think they're ceasefire demands.
Requests?
It's negotiation. And Hamas is the one, that repeatedly has stood in the way of getting a negotiation done.
So Senator Graham today said that Israel should attack Iran's oil fields, and the U.S. should back that up to the hilt. What kind of retaliation do you think would be justifiable? Would you support?
I think what we want is de-escalation, not we don't need or want a wider conflict in the Middle East.
As you know, there was a major development today in the Middle East. Iran launched a salvo of missiles at Israel. Has the Biden-Harris administration exerted the kind of leverage that you would like to see to actually bring about a cessation of hostilities? We've heard these calls ostensibly for a ceasefire, but the flow of armaments has continued unimpeded. You voted for the National Security Supplemental back in April that subsidized those. Has the Biden administration basically just given a blank check, whatever protestations they might give publicly about Israel's conduct?
Well, look, first off, President Biden and Vice President Harris have been abundantly clear that Israel has a right to defend herself. I think that's an important point to make, given all of the false attacks coming from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in so many instances. And President Biden has been abundantly clear with his support of Israel, while also moving forward to try to bring everyone together so that we can get to a ceasefire as well. But
Israel just invaded Lebanon. I mean, a ceasefire seems further away than ever, doesn't it?
I never believe that a ceasefire is further away than ever before. To be clear about that. President Biden has been clear that Congress should come back, and I believe that that's something that we should do. It's something that I support as well, not just in this space, but also with natural disasters. And so Congress should be doing its job for the American people and standing strong in that space as well. But I think the Biden-Harris team has been abundantly clear with how they've been working with Congress and how Congress has been working with them as well, whether it's colleagues that have been fully supportive or those that have also moved resolution or amendments from the floor. In the end, we were able to pass legislation to be supportive of our allies in this effort as well.
Israel has a right to defend itself. With all due respect, it's a bit of a cliche. I mean, it can encompass a lot of potential outcomes. Israel has now invaded Lebanon. I mean, does that fall under the category of Israel having a right to defend itself? Like, what's the limiting principle there?
Well, when you look at what happened before with more rockets being thrown into Israel, and now we're seeing the same attacks coming with ballistic missiles as well from Iran, Israel's defending herself.
Would you be in favor of Israel, with U.S. backing, taking some kind of retaliatory action against Iran directly? Like Senator Graham today called for Israel to bomb Iranian oil fields. Is that within the realm of possibility? Is something you support?
The Biden administration has been abundantly clear through national spokesperson from the military perspective, as well as Jake Sullivan, associated with being supportive of taking on all terrorists, including those that are being sponsored by Iran, and especially holding Iran accountable. That's always been the case, and that has not changed. That's never changed in President Biden's advocacy from when he was first a United States Senator all the way through him serving as President of the United States.
On the issue, well, one final question on the issue of Ukraine. Like I said, you did vote for that national security supplemental bill back in April that funded Israel and Ukraine. Ukraine has been arguing for permission to use U.S. munitions to strike even longer range targets inside Russian territory. Again, is there any limiting principle there? Is there ever like an escalatory risk that you would find intolerable in terms of what the U.S. should authorize Ukraine to do, especially with Russia being the largest nuclear armed state in the world?
The United States has been abundantly clear with the support that we have been working on and towards, and that has already been sent to the President of the United States, of how U.S. weapons will be used, and the U.S. continues to be in that posture as well. We'll see what President Biden and others bring to us with the Joint Chiefs, but as of right now, that's been the path forward of where the United States is, with the support that we've included in the legislation and language in the legislation about use of weapons to defend Ukraine and to make sure that we stand up against Russia.
And would you expect Kamala Harris to basically just continue the foreign policy status quo that we've seen under the Biden administration, or are there like significant policy distinctions that you can discern between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden?
Vice President Harris has been abundantly clear about her policies as well, and she is her own leader as well, which I very much appreciate, and having had a chance to work with her. So that's a question you may want to ask the Vice President herself.
I would love to. Do you have her contact information?
Well, you might. You've been on the road. You might be able to.
All right, I'll try to do so. Thanks, Senator.
Absolutely, man. Take care. Good to meet you.
Thank you. It's, Mr. Lutnick, sorry. Thank you for the pronunciation correction. Yeah, Howard Lutnick, Cantor Fitzgerald. I do know that. I recognized you without even having to look it up. So you're the co-chair of the Trump transition team, is that right?
That's correct.
So in the first Trump administration, a lot of lobbyists got appointed to prominent cabinet positions. Mark Esper, defense secretary, for example, was the top lobbyist. Raytheon, lots of other examples. Is that a philosophy that you would want to see perpetuated in a second Trump administration? Would it differ? What's the status of that?
No lobbyists are part of the transition. So I don't think so at all. I think we have the greatest group of potential, people who want to serve that you've ever seen. We have the leaders of America, from technology, pharmaceuticals, business, defense. They're all willing to serve. You saw Elon Musk is willing to try to help and
Take a cabinet position?
no, I think he'll be an advisor right? And he's going to help build technology because he wants the efficiency of the U.S. government. You've got amazing people trying to help, and they're all focused on it. And so we will have the greatest administration you've ever seen. And it's really been, it's so much fun, shockingly fun, because everybody wants to help, and there's just no friction.
So no lobbyists in a second Trump administration?
I would not expect people who are lobbyists to be a material part. You can't say none. It's 4,000 people joining, so that's a silly thing.
Senior level cabinet positions, let's say.
I don't think so.
And is that a concerted decision that was made somewhere along the way to sort of break from what the approach was in the first administration?
I think with respect to transition, no one associated and as part of the transition is a lobbyist. So we don't have lobbyists as part of the transition. Lobbyists can, of course, suggest quality people. I'm happy to have that. But we don't have lobbyists as part of the group bringing or a part of the transition. They're just not a part of the transition. So we're seeking the best people in the world. It doesn't mean that lobbyists aren't the best people, but I think we've been focused. There's been no focus of it. So I wouldn't even know if there were any, because it's been so small and so rare that I just don't think it's going to be material at all.
So your fellow co-chair is Linda McMahon, correct? Is she still the CEO of the WWE? I'm not sure. She was at some point, right? She was the head of the Small Business Administration in the first Trump administration. Right. And then she was also the chair of this America First Policy Institute. It was basically like an administration in waiting for a second Trump term, right? So is it basically, does her being your co-chair indicate that there's a lot of sway in terms of personnel for a second administration, in terms of the think tank world, which is what she's been involved in these past couple of years?
So Linda and I have split the role of transition, right? So she's in charge, since she runs the American First Policy Institute, she's in charge of policy. So her group is really writing up the objectives for each person who comes in the government. What are their objectives for 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months? I mean, think about, so that everybody's rowing their oars in the same direction. That's policy. And then my side is personnel. Go find the greatest talented athletes to take the field that we possibly can, and use our connections, the Republican Party. I mean, you got 80 million people going to vote. The ability to find incredibly talented people is actually much, much easier than you think. It's amazing. Donald Trump gets to be a second-term president, but he gets a full transition, so everybody knows this is going to be the most exciting 4 years. And, you've got just such pull of people who want to serve. It's been so much fun. And Linda and I have a perfect split. She's in charge of policy because she runs the American First Policy Institute. And I rebuilt Cantor Fitzgerald after 9/11. And I learned how to hire 5,000 people in 15 months. And so we are running the best HR for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Give us a sense of what your prognosis is in the national security and defense sphere in terms of personnel, maybe also policy, insofar as you can convey what Linda McMahon has been up to. Is it still going to be emphasis on increasing defense spending? Elements of the Republican Party are skeptical, what they call the military-industrial complex, in a disparaging way. Other elements of the party may be more favorable toward that. How is that tension being navigated, if it is, in your work thus far?
So we bring in talent, right? So talent. So how does it go? People with deep national security experience. People with deep defense experience.
Give us some examples.
No.
Why not?
Because that's not the way it works.
Okay.
The way it works is I build, basically the way I say it is a mosaic of talent. And the president of the United States is going to choose from that mosaic of talent. So that's my job. But you think about it, we have technology, huge focus on the capacity to improve the technology of the U.S. People who have vast experience across his first administration, in business, the prior administrations. I mean, they're all coming.
Is Jared Kushner coming back?
I don't comment on people. I told you that's not it. But Jared Kushner is a big help to me.
He's actively helping you on this project?
He is absolutely actively helping me, because everybody's helping me. J.D. Vance is helping me. Everybody's helping find the most talented people they have, and they are recommending them to serve in the government. And everybody, how about this? Everybody who serves in the Trump government will have been vouched for by some world-class talented person who says, this person we have confidence in will do a great job in the government. And that is just, it'll be amazing. And that's why it's so fun.
When did you first meet Donald Trump?
I think I met Donald Trump 35 years ago, maybe.
It's been a while.
In my 20s.
In New York circles, or
Correct. In the charity circles. You know, when I was a young man going to the charity parties, I would go to these charity parties all the time, and he was going to the charity parties all the time. So I've met him, you know, decades and decades ago.
all right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure.
So Donald Trump has been saying that if he regains the presidency, one of his priorities is going to be to crack down on anti-Semitism, including by using the coercive power of the state to somehow require colleges and universities that receive public funding to eliminate what he calls anti-Semitic speech. As a Jew yourself, I mean, do you find that to be something that's needed in this climate? And what First Amendment concerns would you have or not have about that?
Like many things the former president says, it's unclear what the actual policy proposal is. I'm excited as a Jewish American by the prospect of electing First Gentleman Doug Emhoff along with Kamala Harris to have the first,
Is Doug on the ballot? I didn't realize that.
be the first Jewish American in the White House, which is very exciting. There's never been a Jewish American family in the White House. And that's exciting. Of course, Kamala Harris has a long track record of supporting the Jewish community, supporting Israel, and I'm confident that she'll be able to help bridge this divide across our college campuses and rein in the rampant anti-Semitism that exists in some universities.
Have you observed what you would call or characterize as rampant anti-Semitism in any Colorado
I
universities?
think we've been better than most in that. We've made a deliberate effort to make sure all of our students feel safe, Jewish, Muslim, regardless of their opinions on conflicts in the Middle East. And I think if you ask most Colorado students, they'd appreciate the efforts that we've made as a state, that our universities, University of Colorado, Colorado State University, have made to help make sure that our universities are safe and civil learning environments for all students.
How have you navigated speech versus harm done to Jewish students, in the sense that, some people will claim that even the a phrase like "from the river to the sea" is inherently anti-Semitic because it's a claim that's calling for the destruction of Israel, and that therefore inflicts harm on students. But it is ultimately a form of speech, right?
It really crosses the line where students are intimidated, are physically threatened, are deterred from being able to attend their gathering places or classes or lunches. And when that occurs, there needs to be an intervention from the university to make sure that all students can feel safe and respected on their campus.
And have those sorts of interventions been required on your part over the past year?
Again, I can't follow every campus in the United States. I can say
in Colorado,
I'm proud of the job we've done in setting the tone, preventing disruptions from classes and making sure the students feel safe at our campuses.
So this is not squarely within your remit as the governor of Colorado, but you were in Congress previously, and take an interest in foreign policy issues. There was, and it does have some downstream ramifications in terms of the political climate. So there was the Iranian strike on Israel today. The Biden administration says that it's calling for a ceasefire, and yet it seems to have given at least implicit authorization for Israel to launch an invasion of Lebanon. Do you have any hope that any of this turmoil could be reined in anytime soon, or are we just kind of in for constant conflagration in the Middle East?
Well, sometimes it's darkest, before the end of the storm, and I think we should always remain in that American spirit, optimistic and hopeful, that we can bring people together to create a lasting and just peace in the Middle East.
But one final question for you. So you had a libertarian streak, or you're known for at least being hospitable to some libertarian ideals or concepts, at least for a Democrat. Kamala Harris, back in August, said that she was going to be proposing some form of price controls. It's been a little vague what specifically she's been proposing. But as somebody who at least is reputed to have this kind of libertarian inclination, did that give you any pause?
Kamala Harris has not proposed any kind of price controls. What's been mischaracterized as that is making sure we conduct
price gouging she's against.
Antitrust investigations into illegal price gouging. Absolutely. She's not brought forward and does not support any kind of price controls. And I would contrast that with Donald Trump's across-the-board 20% tariffs, which would increase costs for American consumers and restrict free trade.
All right. Thanks, Governor. So tonight, the very first exchange was about Israel, and obviously the events of today with Iran firing the salvo of missiles into Israel. J.D. Vance said something to the effect of, look, Israel should be able to do whatever it decides is correct, but wouldn't the U.S. inevitably be involved in whatever military operation Israel might undertake against Iran, whether it's supplying the armaments or the intelligence or diplomatic backing? So doesn't the U.S. have a role in weighing in on whether it might be worth entangling the U.S. in some kind of retaliatory strike against Iran?
Well, J.D. Vance was correct in to say that Israel has the right to defend itself. Israel has been under attack. Its very existence has been under attack by Iran directly in the unprecedented hypersonic ballistic missiles that were launched from Iranian soil to Israel today. And it has been under attack through Iranian proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. Of course, U.S. resources when it comes to our critical military aid to Israel, when it comes to our funding for Iron Dome. That is of overwhelming support, including from J.D. Vance and most importantly, President Trump. But we voted to pass that. But the reality is it's the Biden administration, Kamala Harris, who not only slow-walked that military aid, but have been turning their backs at every opportunity, demanding a ceasefire and not wanting to allow Israel to defend itself. I believe Israel should defend itself, and certainly those are the policies of President Trump.
Hasn't the Biden-Harris administration supplied more military resources to Israel than any administration ever?
The United States Congress forced that through. Joe Biden slow-walked it. Kamala Harris slow-walked it. So it's because of the leadership of the United States Congress. Don't forget there were multiple veto threats that were issued by Joe Biden when we passed the Israel military aid. Not once, not twice, 2 veto threats. And it was only when it was combined in a package of other priorities for the Biden administration. So no, at every opportunity they have blocked critical military aid to Israel at the most significant time of need.
So would you like to, what you would want to see from a future Trump administration is to remove even the minimal constraints that the Biden administration has placed on Israel in its conduct of its military campaigns against Hezbollah, against Hamas, potentially against Iran? Do we want fewer constraints imposed on Israel? Is that what you'd like to see?
I want to return to the effective peace through strength policies of President Trump that brought peace to the Middle East, whether it was the historic breakthrough of the Abraham Accords. I also want to see a return to the maximum pressure campaign against Iran, which has been wiped away by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, turning over $100 billion to Iran in sanctions relief that directly go to fund Hezbollah and Hamas and the very hypersonic ballistic missiles that are firing into Israel. The maximum pressure campaign was working under President Trump. That's why the Iranian regime was at its knees economically, and they've been on the rise because of Joe Biden's obsession with appeasement of the Iranian regime. So the American people, what's most important on the debate night is they can compare where we are today around the world in our national security versus where we were under President Trump, which was peace in the Middle East, historic breakthroughs, normalization between Israel and Arab countries, as well as steadfast support for our most precious ally in the region.
So is the end state of this maximum pressure campaign ultimately to inflict regime change on Iran?
Deterrence. The end state is deterrence to ensure that Israel and there is stability in the Middle East. It is deterrence, and it was an effective deterrence strategy under President Trump, where you did not see Hamas attacks like October 7th happen under President Trump's watch, just like you did not see a catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan with 13 service members' lives lost under Joe Biden. You didn't see that under President Trump, and just like you did not see Putin invade any other country under President Trump. And J.D. Vance hit a very important point this evening, said the only president who hasn't started and gotten entangled in terms of the U.S. in a war in our lifetime, I'm around the same age as J.D., is Donald J. Trump. That is a huge, huge accomplishment.
So, Congresswoman, Governor Walz started out tonight by repeating this refrain that Israel has a right to defend itself. Yeah. Israel has just invaded Lebanon. Israel is now intimating that it could attack Iran. So shouldn't we be looking for a little more than just these platitudes about Israel having a right to defend itself? What is the limiting principle, especially when the U.S. is the one providing the armaments for Israel to wage these military campaigns, as you know, having voted for the National Security Supplemental back in April, which underwrote Israel's war effort?
I absolutely did vote for it. I voted for that along with every other supplemental that was available. And I will tell you this. it is important that people understand what diplomacy looks like. And it looks like the fact that this relationship between Israel and the United States has existed since before I was born. And guess what? This relationship will continue on in perpetuity even after I'm gone. And so when you look at Israel, I think it is important that people start to talk about the fact that the state of Israel versus their leadership. Because right now, or when I went to Israel, I know that the people were protesting Netanyahu because Netanyahu was reforming the courts. In addition to the fact that Netanyahu was under investigation along with people in his administration. Sound familiar? Does it sound like somebody else that you know? It sounds like Donald Trump to me, somebody that has reformed our courts that have decided that he now has a level of immunity that he should not be entitled to based on our laws, as well as somebody who is under criminal indictment, as well as somebody who has criminal convictions. And so different people do their votes for different reasons. But for me, when I'm looking forward and I'm trying to figure out what is going to happen, if for some reason, let's say we say, well, you know what? You had your Democratic election and we just don't like your leader, so we will leave you. Will that give permission to our allies to leave us if, God forbid, Donald Trump come back into power and then they leave us, and then that leaves us more insecure? So, I mean, everybody has their reasons for why they do stuff, but I will also tell you this, because the issue today has to do with the fact that Iran ended up firing missiles over into Israel.
After Israel invaded Lebanon.
Okay, but is Iran Lebanon, or is Iran?
No.
Okay, so
But this thing, it's a spiraling catastrophe that the Biden administration has done nothing to rein in.
Let's be clear. When the attacks, which I will say, everything that happened in Lebanon, or the initial attacks, at least that was more calculated, and it was more, it was specifically intended for who? For terrorists, correct? I mean, these are
You got to clarify what you're saying. I don't follow.
Hezbollah.
Right.
So Israel was attacking Hezbollah, correct?
Well, they've done a ground invasion into Lebanon now.
They have now done one, but to be clear, they were attacking Hezbollah, who is a terrorist organization, correct?
They've invaded the entire country. They bombed Beirut. They've bombed the country.
Okay,
So you think everybody who's been killed in the Israeli bombardments has been Hezbollah?
I didn't say that. I'm
Okay.
telling you that what I am saying is that at least when Lebanon, we talked about what? They had the pagers, correct?
Right.
And so they were literally more calculated in trying not to do.
Those pages blew up in grocery stores, and a little girl was killed.
I understand, and I'm not disagreeing with that. And I want to be clear. No one should ever be okay with war.
You voted to fund it.
No, I did not vote to fund war. What I voted for.
Yes, you did. You voted to supply Israel with armaments that they're using in their prosecution of the war.
Do you understand that we took more than one vote? Let me ask you, since you know about.
I know all about it. I follow it very closely.
So tell me about the rest of my votes.
On the National Security Supplemental?
Can you tell me about all the votes that we had? Because we had.
Yeah, you voted for Ukraine, for the Indo-Pacific, for...
Because we had 3 votes on Israel.
There have been like a million votes on Israel.
We had 3 votes. Let me clarify. We had 3 votes as it relates to funding for Israel. So let me make sure that your record is very clear. The very first vote was to fund Israel and defund the IRS because that's what the Republicans put on the floor. That because the Republicans run the House. Okay. What was my vote? It was a no.
No.
Then
But you ultimately voted yes on the bill to fund Israel.
The second vote was to fund Israel and no other funding. Okay? The third vote, was it just for funding Israel, or was it also to get money to the people of Gaza?
And that aid has been consistently blocked. I mean, you can complain about Netanyahu, but he's the one administering the funding that you've said. This is about the debate.
He seemed shaky at times. Do you feel like he was an effective messenger tonight?
I do. I think he was there to deliver on policy. It's one of the things that people complained about in the first debate is that they weren't able to get a lot of policy because there were so many
I guess we're
distractions as it relates to the answers with Donald Trump and things like that. So
Make sure you get your debate question in, much more relevant. I am. You interrupted me.
After a 10-minute diatribe.
About a foreign policy issue? What, you object to that?
I also have questions I want to ask about.
All right, I'm sure they'll be fascinating. So here's the standard question that journalists ask at these things, and they get really offended if we ask about foreign policy. I even did the requisite hook to the debate by asking about Walls's comments on Israel, but that wasn't good enough for that idiot who was really offended that we were occupying the Congresswoman's time by asking about, I don't know, her votes on national security supplemental funding, etc. But here's what they ask. Excuse me, Congresswoman, did Governor Walz do what he had to do tonight to win over the voters? I mean, they'll ask the most banal, generic, uninformative questions and then throw a hissy fit when I saunter in and actually ask something a bit more substantive. So I hope you enjoyed that little example there of how the media functions.